Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Tales of Home, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. I set the plates the way Harold used to like them. Forks on the left, knives turned in napkins folded once on the maple table we bartered for at a winter heritage fair the year the snow wouldn't quit. The table's rubbed edges remember elbows and report cards and holiday pies that slumped in the middle. Tonight it held cornbread in a cast-iron skillet that still crackled at the rim, a platter of skillet chicken with lemon and thyme. Green beans snapped that afternoon, and a pitcher of sweet tea sweating onto a saucer. Through the screen door, the South Hill air smelled like cut grass and warm dust. Somewhere down on Grand, a truck groaned through a gear. Mason texted that they were 5 out. 5 became 10. I poured tea and let the ice do its small complaints. When the latch finally clicked, the dog across the alley barked twice, then thought better of it. Mason shouldered through first, not looking up, his eyes already on the kitchen like it had something to prove to him. Sloane followed with sunglasses in her hair and a phone in her hand. She lifted it just high enough to frame the room. "Sunday family dinner," she said to her camera voice pitched sunny. Historic craftsman vibes. A bubble popped over her lipstick when she closed her mouth. "Hi, Mom," Mason said, kissing the air near my cheek. He had that not-quite beard he grows when he's between things. Sloane gave me a one-armed hug that smelled like bergamot in a department store. She set her toad on a chair I'd told them not to use for coats, and the chair shrugged under the weight. "We're late because the lights on 29th are a nightmare," Sloane said, as if the city owed her an apology. "It's fine," I said. "Food's hot." We settled. The maple showed its age under the plates. I passed the chicken. The cornbread split down its gold seam with the sound I wait for every time, the sound that says the pan and the batter made peace with each other. "How was your week?" I asked. "A blur," Sloane said. "I've been storyboarding the brand refresh for a client in Austin. I'd loop you in, but it's a whole aesthetic universe." Mason nodded like an assistant. "We also swung by a salvage yard," he said. "Pulled a farmhouse sink for peanuts. If this kitchen had one like that—" "This kitchen has what it has," I said, but softly. "It cooks just fine. It could be worth more with a few updates." Sloane said, trading me a smile the way dealers trade cards, quick and practiced. "You know, strategic enhancements. The footprint is charming." "The footprint is mine," I said. The green beans squeaked against the serving spoon. Knife against plate, small scrape. I breathed the way the YMCA instructor taught us when they made us do Tai Chi in the multipurpose room, in through the nose, shoulders down. The wind shifted. Hydrangeas along the side fence let go a sweetness that barely made it through the screen. "Anyway," Mason said, fork poised, "we've been crunching numbers. I've got a line on 3 Reno gigs off the river. Easy pulls. People want shiplap again. It's a moment." He glanced at Sloane, who gave him a tiny nod, permission to keep going. "We're thinking about what makes a house feel like it belongs to the decade. This house belonged to 1911 before we were born," I said. I buttered cornbread for something to do with my hands. "That's the thing," Sloane said. "The bones are adorable. If we opened the sightlines and did a proper island, the bones can rest," I said. I hear myself sometimes the way a lunch lady hears her own voice over clattering trays. It's not the voice I wanted to have with my son, but it works. Meals appear, bills get paid. Silence leaned in between us for a breath. Out front, a cyclist called, "Out on your left," to no one, and passed anyway. I could feel the table remembering Mason's spelling lists, and the time Harold spilled coffee, and we laughed until the whole morning slid away like a bad dream. "Mom," Mason said, misreading my quiet as an invitation. "We're also thinking, since we're all here, that we should spread the costs around. Utilities, groceries, little stuff. Fair is fair." "We'll sort it," Sloane added quickly, already tired of the conversation her mouth had started. "It's just equitable to share." "You've been here 8 months," I said. "The sharing hasn't found us yet." "It's because we're in build mode," Mason said. "Couple more weeks and the ship turns." "Ships don't turn because people call out from the deck," I said. "They turn because somebody down in the works moves metal and heat." Sloane laughed once, not kindly. She held her phone like a talisman. "We're not trying to be adversarial, June. It just feels like we've been carrying a lot of the momentum and—" Mason set his fork down harder than the table deserved. The sound landed and then rolled out to the corners of the room. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked past me at the window at the dark beyond it that held only our reflection. "You act like a mooch," he said. "Like we're the engine and you're just along for the ride." The word did a clear thing inside my chest. It didn't slice. It's set. It's set like concrete when the heat's just right and the water's measured. I laid my napkin still clean beside my plate. I took my time with the tea, a small drink, not a stall. I saw the maples scratch from Mason's third-grade truck and the knot where Harold carved out a splinter one evening with his pocket knife. I heard the radio in my memory. his whistle off-key. The sentence he never finished about saving for a new water heater because the old one had a noise he didn't like. When I set the glass down, I put it exactly where a ring of sweat had left its mark 3 summers ago. It matched. "You and Sloan," I said, "have 24 hours to find somewhere else to stay. No dramatics." My voice went only as far as it needed to go. The room registered the sentence in a dozen small ways. The refrigerator's motor took a longer breath. The ice in the pitcher ticked a little louder. A book on the living room shelf decided gravity was urgent and settled an inch. Mason's eyes climbed to mine and didn't know what to do there. His jaw worked once, twice. "You're not serious." "I'm as serious as a gas bill," I said. "Pack what's yours." Sloan kept the smile, but it was a different one now, the kind you put on to walk past a store clerk who's seen the thing you slipped in your pocket. "Let's be rational," she said. "We're a family. Families don't—" "Take your plate," I said, and I stood. I gathered mine too. Mason shoved his chair back. The legs barked against the floorboards. "After everything I've done here," he said, "you're going to talk to me like I'm some stranger." I didn't give him my old inventory. It would have been a long list and useless. The list wasn't the point. I walked my plate to the sink. The faucet, when I turned it, came to life the way new faucets do, quiet and sure. I ran water over lemon and thyme and grease, and the plate gave up what it didn't need anymore. Behind me, a chair pushed in too hard, then pulled out again. Sloan's whisper instructional clipped, the faint rub of Mason's hands against his jeans. I washed. I set the plate in the rack. I folded the dish towel over my shoulder and felt how the weight knew the place it belonged. The porch light switch is to the left of the back door, a cheap plastic toggle Harold always meant to replace with something brass and dignified. When I reached it, I placed my thumb over its little ridge and pressed. The bulb on the eave blinked once and held steady. Across the alley, the dog stood up on its pallet, curious, then lay down again. I locked the door because that is what you do when a day is done. At the table, the cornbread went cool. I slid what was left into a tin and clicked the lid so it made that tinny sound lids make when they're sure of themselves. Mason moved his hand across the table and came away with a breadcrumb he didn't know what to do with. He stared at it like it might tell him what to say. Sloan looked at my cabinets as if they were a problem set she could finish if the light was better. I wiped the table with long, even passes. The maple gave me back the room and the wiped arcs a plain surface without complaint. The towel came away damp and clean. I hung it over the oven handle. The kitchen clock said 7:42. The second hand chased nothing. When I turned off the porch light a second time, the habit of checking my thumb found the ridge without searching. The dark outside settled into place the way a quilt does when you shake it toward the bed and let it breathe as it falls. In the quiet, the house remembered itself. By morning, the kitchen had returned to its plain face. The skillet sat rinsed and upside down to dry the maple table bare except for the salt and pepper. I brewed coffee the way Harold taught me cold water first to pause before the pour, and drank it standing at the sink looking through the screen at the hydrangeas gone a little leggy along the fence. The house had the quiet of a thing bracing like a bridge in wind. A door down the hall opened, then closed. Sloan's perfume arrived before her voice. "We'll need until the weekend," she called, not quite a question. "You have what I said," I answered, "today." Her footsteps retreated across the runner. The bathroom fan started and rattled the way it always had when someone turned it on too hard. On the counter lay the stack I never meant to curate power gas water internet. Yellow sticky notes in my handwriting with dates and asterisks. They hadn't been a case file when I started saving them. They were just the months of a life. I slid the newest bill from its envelope and set it on top. The number wasn't a shock anymore. It was a slope. Each increase had been small enough to explain someone left the porch light on. Someone ran the dryer late, but the slope was there, whether you narrated or not. The slope had other landmarks. The water heater went first. I remember the sound it made the day it failed, a hollow thump like a door hit by wind. The repairman explained the combustion chamber with a pencil and a diagram he'd drawn 100 times. He quoted a price that made me smile without humor. "I'll Venmo you," Mason had said, thumb already on his phone like words could make a wire hum. End of week. The end of week arrived, then went where ends go. Laundry had appeared, without origin, out in the hallway, baskets set down as if by migration shirts. With printing, I didn't recognize a towel that had seen a lake socks that didn't belong to anyone I knew. I folded things out of muscle memory and put them outside their door. Some came back inside, some didn't, but the baskets replenished themselves. Momentum, Sloan likes to say. The house learned a different definition. Around 10, I pulled weeds from the front bed. The sun had not yet burned off the smell of damp earth, and a neighbor's sprinkler ticked 2 lawns over. Gus Dwyer, in his bleach-softened mariner's tee, lifted a hand from the sidewalk. He doesn't do the kind of waving that expects conversation, so I was surprised when he turned up my walk. "Morning," he said, not nosy. He looked at the porch, the door, the quiet. He looked like a man who had once studied smoke to know what the fire intended. Morning, Gus. He reached into the folder under his arm and handed me a photocopy of something official. Property tax statement, he said. From last year. Figured you might want a clean copy. Paper beats talk. I took it you didn't have to. I know, he said. I did anyway. He touched the brim of a cap he wasn't wearing and headed on. I watched him stop 2 houses down to pet a dog who had chosen the shade under a rhododendron. Back inside, my phone buzzed in the old ceramic bowl by the telephone jack. A text from Bernice. Call me when you're decent. Or if you're not, I don't judge. I called. She answered on the first ring. You didn't sleep, she said. I slept like a bad couch. That tracks, I'm coming by. You don't have to. I know, she said, the twin of Gus's answer, and then she was gone from the line in the way only people who keep their promises permit themselves. Half an hour later, she was in my kitchen with a bag of bagels in her blunt mouth. She bit into sesame like it had asked for it. You good? I'm upright. She nodded at the cleared table. So, it's real. It's spoken, I said. Spoken is a door, she said, but a door needs a hinge. She pointed her chin at the bill stack. Put some hinge on it. She has a way of saying things so their corners show. I set the bagels in the bread box and laid out the salt and pepper with the care one gives small, useful things. You know what he said. I didn't repeat the word. It wasn't that the syllables hurt to say. It's that saying them gave them work to do. They'd already done enough. Bernice wiped a thumb across the counter, caught a stray breadcrumb, flicked it into the sink. Generosity without a railing is a fall, she said. We're both too old to be good at falling. She doesn't linger. She squeezed my forearm harder than sympathy and left with a paper bag that now held 1 bagel fewer and the shape of her counsel in the air. Mason came into the kitchen just before noon, hair-damp jaw shadowed with the day. He had the look he used to wear before big games, breath high in his chest, shoulders set, and I remembered the afternoon he'd struck out and broke his bat in the garage because he didn't yet know that wood breaks easier when you want it to. We need to be rational, he said, a sound he'd borrowed from Sloan. Couple days we can line up a sublet. It'd be stupid to move twice. I gave you a day, I said. Why are you doing this? It wasn't a plea. It was a proposition, like there might be an answer that could be negotiated for parts. I didn't give him a history. I didn't tell him about the December when the furnace wheezed and Harold stood on a chair in his socks to tape plastic over the windows. I didn't tell him about Januaries when I stretched soup with barley and the way barley gives up its shape slowly, like it's reluctant to become the thing it's becoming. Pack, I said. Call the people you need to call. He put his palms flat on the maple as if the table could argue for him. His left hand landed where he had carved the faintest of initials the summer he turned 8 and discovered that nothing feels more permanent to an 8-year-old than a letter shaved into wood. He looked down and saw it maybe for the first time since he made it, and then he looked away hard enough to move the air. Sloan didn't come in. She stood in the doorway with her phone held at her chest like a picture frame. The screen lit her jaw. It was not hard to guess what she was doing. The neighborhood has a dozen forums and a dozen more small theaters for the performance of grievance. I didn't go looking for their performance. It found me anyway because that's the thing about neighbors and the kindness of modern times. Screenshots walk themselves to your door. By 2-3 messages had arrived from people who never traffic in gossip until it lands on their porch with a stamp. Is everything okay? Saw something odd on Nextdoor. You want me to report a post? One from a woman I barely know who once borrowed my ladder. Included a captured square of Sloane's words about a stubborn elder who refuses to share basics, and a photo of my porch cropped to remove the house numbers. The comments under it did what comments do when fed a simple story. I set the phone face down. The ceramic bowl took its weight. The sound it made was familiar. It was the sound spoons make after a meal when you lay them back in the drawer they've always returned to. I opened the drawer with the rubber bands and the pencils that have lived in this house longer than some people I've known. In the back was a package of envelopes and a pad of lined paper I keep for lists that need a straight edge. I dated the paper. I wrote my name and the address of the house. I wrote 2 sentences I understood and could defend. I didn't use legal words I hadn't earned. I used the words I could carry. The pen bled a little at the downstrokes. It was a pen Harold once took to the bank because he liked how it looked sitting on the counter when you waited for your number to be called. I folded the paper in thirds the way envelopes prefer. I slid it home and pressed the glue shut with the side of my thumb. I wrote 2 names on the front in my careful hand. The refrigerator kicked on. In the living room, a book shifted, or I imagined it. Hydrangeas moved somewhere out of sight. The house did not offer an opinion. I set the envelope beside the salt and pepper, and then I set the salt and pepper on top of it, so the breeze from the screen door wouldn't take what I'd made. The maple held all 3 without complaint. I poured the rest of the coffee over ice and drank it leaning on my elbows like I had as a younger woman when dinner was late and a boy needed help with fractions. The porch light was off because it was the middle of the day. The switch knew where it was. So did I. The envelope sat under the salt and pepper until afternoon like a stone under clear water, visible, available, untouched. When I wiped the maple after lunch, I lifted the shakers and moved the envelope just enough to dry the ring of condensation the pitcher had left, then set the shakers back on it, not hiding, not displaying. The house moved around the paper as if the paper were part of the furniture. They treated it like weather. Doors opened and closed, drawers slid. The shower ran too long. A hairdryer barked at the mirror. Mason passed the table twice with his eyes trained on anything that wasn't the table. Sloane crossed the room with her phone tilted inward, chin tucked, recording nothing you could see and everything she wanted to keep. At 1, I took my tote to the library on Perry. It was the old branch with the bulletin board that had been telling the truth about piano lessons and lost cats since before my knees started to narrate the stairs. I fed the copy machine, my Bill's Light gas water, the repair for the water heater, the card from the man who replaced the igniter, the receipt where I'd bought the new faucet when the old one coughed rust. Each sheet slid out warm and obedient. I stacked them by month, clipped them with the copper clips Harold liked because they didn't bite the paper too hard, and slipped the whole thing into a manila folder. The tab took Inkwell, house expenses. The machine asked if I wanted more copies. I didn't. One truth was enough. Bernice texted me a name and a number with no commentary: Amelia Park. I called from the library steps while a boy with a skateboard balanced on its flat end, practicing the lift that makes a board think it can fly. A receptionist answered with a voice that had polished edges. "You're June. We can see you at 3, she said, like she was inviting me to keep a promise I'd made to myself. The office sat downtown in a square of brick that used to be a furniture store, the kind that sold good couches and heavy lamps. The lobby smelled like lemon oil and new carpet. A plant in the corner attempted to reach the ceiling and graciously failed. Amelia came out herself to the door, 40 hair pulled back without ambition jacket that didn't announce itself. Her handshake was dry and precise. "Come in," she said. Her office held shelves full of other people's tangles and a small window that looked at the alley where deliveries come. She gestured to the chair. "Tell me what you want me to know." She didn't interrupt when I told it. She didn't make the noise people make when they want you to think they're on your side. She wrote 3 short lines on a legal pad and kept her pen capped when she wasn't using it. When I finished, she tapped the pad once and said, "You own the house. They're occupants by permission. We'll withdraw permission in writing the way the rules here ask us to. If they don't leave, we ask the court for possession. We'll keep the words plain and the steps careful." "I already wrote something," I said, and I set my envelope on the edge of her desk. The glue had dried down hard. The paper felt honest in my hand. She read my 2 sentences and nodded. "You aren't a lawyer," she said, not unkindly. "This says what it needs to say. We'll add what the clerk likes to see." She printed a document on letterhead that had her name in a sober font. "We'll have this served by someone whose job is serving things. You don't need to be part of the theater." A man with a careful tie and a tie clip that looked like a tiny wrench came in from the hallway when she called him. He introduced himself as Hugh and gave me a card printed on mat stock. "We do this quietly," he said, meaning he does it loudly enough for the law and not so loud that the neighbors gather. We arranged times. Amelia slid me a sheet with a list, not grand instructions, just boxes to check so paper could find paper. Back at the house, I put the manila folder in the top drawer where I keep warranties and the 2 spare keys no one else knows about. The envelope with my careful hand stayed under the salt and pepper until Hugh's knock at 5. He stood on the porch with the stance of a man who keeps both feet exactly where they should be. Sloane answered with the camera already in front of her face. "You're being filmed," she said, "the same way people say you're being rude, like information can move blame." Hugh had the face of a person who has been filmed before. "Service of notice," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a speech. He held the paper with 2 fingers the way you hold something you're willing to lose. Mason appeared over Sloane's shoulder with a look I recognized from the time he saw a foul ball coming and chose not to catch it. "This means nothing," Sloane said, "because words can feel like shields if you say them fast enough. You're harassing. It means exactly what it says." Hugh said, not turning to the camera, not looking at me for confirmation I didn't owe. He set the papers in Sloane's empty hand. "You are served." He left with the soft steps of a man familiar with porches. The post went up on the neighborhood app before Hugh reached his car. "Pray for us," Sloane typed over a photo of the porch from an angle that made the hydrangeas look like props. "We're being thrown out by family." The comments came in waves, indignation at vagueness, indignation at certainty, people who knew nothing and didn't need to. I didn't answer. My phone thumped with the energy of other people's feelings. 20 minutes later, Gus's name appeared on a screenshot someone sent me. "I've lived next door a long time. I've seen who pays for what. Don't twist what's simple. He doesn't usually spend words that aren't a right tool, but the words he spent held. The house changed temperature in small ways. They shut doors hard. The television tried on volume the walls weren't built for. Laughter came out longer than the joke if there was a joke. The envelope I'd written had been replaced by Amelia's crisp paper on their sideboard, and that's the paper they ignored now. My kitchen kept its plain face. I folded towels, wiped the ring a glass left, moved a stack of magazines from one place to another, not because it mattered, but because order is a language I still speak. At 8, I made tea and carried a mug to the back steps. The porch light was off. The evening stretched thin between fence posts. In the alley, the dog rearranged himself and sighed. Bernice texted, "How's the temperature?" I typed warm in places and left it at that. She sent back a thumbs up I could hear. On the counter, the folder waited with the patience only paper has. I added to it a photo of the electric meter from that afternoon with the numbers bright. The grocery receipts with the produce marked and the totals circled in Harold's old red pen. A printout of the post that trimmed off our house numbers and kept our porch. The text where Mason said end of week about the water heater. I didn't annotate. I didn't staple. I let the sequence tell itself by date. The next morning I offered what I could offer. I set an envelope on the table with moving help written on it, and inside 500s that took up more space than they weighed. I told them it would cover a storage unit and a truck. "It isn't punishment," I said. "It's for the day you pick." Mason looked at it, then at Sloane. She laughed the way people laugh when their mouths need a reason. The envelope stayed where I put it. When I trimmed the hydrangeas around noon, Sloane took a call on the porch that bent toward the street. "Imagine being put out by your own," she said, telling the air our business. A couple with a stroller slowed. The dog in the alley stood up on his pallet listening to human voices. I cut the stem as clean as I could and carried the blossoms to the compost, where they would go back to dirt the way they're supposed to. By afternoon, Bernice sat at my table with a pen that seemed to check the weight of the room. "You good," she said. "I'm holding," I said. She looked over the folder without rifling it. "Good bones on this," she said, meaning the order pleased her. She pointed her chin at the moving help envelope. "You trying to make me cry?" "No," I said. "I'm trying to make the day less heavy when it lands on them." She tapped the table once. "You've done your part." She gathered her keys and left me with the scrape of chair legs done right. In the mail that evening came one of those official envelopes that have a window like a small aquarium. My name floated there. The paper inside had a seal stamped at the top and the address of the building with the wood that smells like polish. The date printed in the middle was a date ink can't back away from. I slid the notice into the folder with the bills and receipts and the photo of the meter. The manila held without complaint. I put the folder in the drawer and closed the drawer in a way that didn't announce itself. In the other room, the television's laugh track worked through its cues. I rinsed a glass and set it upside down to dry. The porch light switch found my thumb when my thumb went looking for it. The bulb did what bulbs do. When asked, it came on and stayed. The morning of the date on the paper came in the ordinary way. I made toast and didn't finish it. The hydrangeas knocked once against the fence and then minded their own side. I took the manila folder from the drawer and checked its spine with my thumb bills receipts, meter photo screenshots, the notice with its calm seal. The porch light was off. The kitchen clock said what it always says and kept going. Downtown, the courthouse kept its smell, lemon oil, and old varnish, a temperate cool that felt earned. At security, the bin took my keys like it had taken thousands of keys. The guard slid the tray back with 2 fingers and wished me a good morning, as if that were a reasonable thing to wish anyone walking toward a room where decisions are made. Amelia met me outside the hearing room with a folder thinner than mine and a nod that said we would do what paper asks. Her jacket was the same quiet gray as last time. "We'll be brief," she said, not making it a strategy, so much as a description of how the day would go. We sat on a bench that had grown shiny from other people's waiting. The door at the front opened and closed in a rhythm that probably looked random to a stranger and familiar to the staff. Mason and Sloane arrived with the pace of people who believe timing is a skill. He wore a tie that made his throat look like a place he wanted to escape. She wore a black camera tucked in her bag with the zipper open as if ready to be deputized. We didn't speak. The screen on the wall listed names in a font that doesn't bother anybody. When ours scrolled up, Amelia stood and I stood too. Inside, the judge's bench made sense of the room. The clerk spoke softly and with perfect aim. The bailiff said the same words he says every hour, and they did their old work. We took our places, Amelia and I at one table, Mason and Sloane at the other. The manila folder sat between my hands, warm now, because bodies make heat even when they're still. Amelia went first. She didn't narrate a life. She placed facts. "Owner," she said, and pushed forward a copy of the deed. "Permission granted," she said, and let the timeline find its shape. Notice served, and the photo of Hugh standing on our porch with the paper in his steady hand slid across the wood. Expenses paid by petitioner alone, and the stack of bills month by month joined the story. She offered the meter photo and the grocery receipts like tools set out in order before a job. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for anything she couldn't hold. The judge looked where judges look. He asked the clerk to mark exhibits. He read without theatrics. He had the posture of a man who has come to understand that chairs can be trusted if you let them. Any written agreement for rent? He asked, eyes on the paper, not on me. No, Amelia said. Occupancy by permission. Permission withdrawn in writing. He nodded once and made a small note. Sloane leaned toward her microphone as if loudness could shape the law. We've contributed in ways that aren't on paper, she said. Aaron's momentum vision for the property. It isn't right to erase that. We're a family. The judge didn't look unkind. He didn't look anything. This matter is about possession and payment. He said, the syllables falling in place like quarter inches on a tape, not about fairness as a feeling. Do you have receipts? A ledger? She opened her bag and let frustration shuffle. We have plans, she said, which was not an answer. Mason cleared his throat. We were between invoices. He said, the tie betraying him a little, his fingers under the table working the knot as if the knot would stand to reason. We were about to square up. Amelia tapped the top bill with her capped pen. 8 months of utilities in my client's name, she said. Repairs to major systems, no reimbursement received. The judge glanced down the page again, then up. Any witnesses, he asked, and Amelia lifted her chin toward the back. Gus stood from a bench like a man asked to move a chair, not a mountain. He walked to the front in the way firefighters do everything competent, compact, unsentimental. He didn't promise anything he couldn't keep. Lived next door, 22 years, he said into the microphone that didn't need his volume. Seen who wheels the bins on pickup day. Seen who signs for deliveries. Seen who calls the repair truck. He looked at the judge because that's where you look. She pays. They don't. Thank you, the judge said and motioned him back. Gus returned to the bench and put his cap. Today he had one on his knee, respectful of furniture that wasn't his. The judge paused. You could hear the air adjust when the vents cycled. A chair creaked behind us like a bird thinking about a branch. He drew a line on his pad and put his pen down. Judgment for the petitioner, he said, words flat from use. Possession to be returned. Vacate by the date in the order. If not, enforcement may issue. Costs as outlined. The clerk stamped something with a sound that has had the same pitch for decades. My body didn't surge. It did something smaller, let the breath I'd been keeping leave through the doorway like steam. Amelia gave one nod you could miss if you weren't watching. At the clerk's counter, paper met paper the way river water meets a known bend. The clerk slid forms to Mason without drama. He signed as if the pen were too sharp. Sloane stood angled to capture a better story, and found none the room would give her. We'll appeal, she said softly, and then glanced at the sign reminding everyone that the clerk does not discuss appeals. Amelia put a copy of the order in a slim envelope and offered it to me. This goes in your folder, she said. Keep it where you keep the others. It sounded like advice and also like a sentence about continuity. We shook hands. Her grip remembered me from last time. You did what was required, she said. It wasn't praise and it didn't need to be. Outside, the light had climbed without heat. On the steps, people moved around one another the way rivers find their own lanes. Mason lingered a few feet away, looking at the traffic on Riverside, as if he might see a version of himself cross the street and wave back. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't go far. Sloane stared out over the parking meters, mouth tight, like the city had taken her parking on principle. She turned toward me, and then away in the same breath, the way swallows change their minds mid-air. A wind came up from the west and moved the edge of her hair. The courthouse doors opened and closed behind us like lungs. I didn't take a victory lap. I tucked the envelope under my palm the way you carry a photo you don't plan to show anyone. I walked down the steps with my hand on the rail because that's why rails are there. The car was where I left it. The meter read 12 minutes and I paid for an hour because I don't like dead in any size. On the drive back, the red lights did their orderly switching. A school group in matching shirts waited for the bus and tried not to look like they were counting how long waiting takes. At the four-way, a man in a truck ceded me the turn with a gesture that was half courtesy and half impatience, which is how courtesy comes sometimes. I took it. At home, the house had kept its face. I set the envelope on the counter and slid it into the folder that told the story by date. The manila took the new weight without complaint. I closed the drawer the way you close drawers when you prefer the sound of wood touching wood to the sound of anything else. The hydrangeas were ready for water. I filled the metal can and carried it to the fence, letting the spout pour a cleaned-up rain over the roots. A bee changed its mind and left the blossom it was pretending to love. The neighbor's dog watched from the alley with the expression dogs keep for people who have become predictable again. Inside, I wiped the table even though it didn't need it. The maple offered back its pale shine in long, honest strokes. The salt and pepper sat in their usual square. The chair that wobbles did its wobble. I righted it with the heel of my hand. The kitchen clock moved its second hand with all the ceremony it ever spares the second hand. Evening drew the light down slow like a shade you don't tug. I turned on the porch light not for any particular person, but for the way a house looks from the street when it owns its glow. In the living room, I straightened the stack of magazines again and set the top one to rights. The kettle let out a sound that meant water would be ready when a hand wanted it. The day sat where it had been put. The room with polished wood did its work, and so did mine. They came with a rented truck that stuttered in reverse and beeped like a stubborn bird. The morning had a thin light to it, pale enough to make the porch boards look newly sanded, though they weren't. I set a pitcher of water and a stack of paper cups on the maple and moved the moving help envelope to the center, where you have to see it if you're looking at anything at all. Sloane carried out the first box like a standard she wanted seen. It wore fragile stickers on two sides and a strip of tape that glittered. Mason followed with the lamp from the front room, the one with the crooked harp. He didn't ask for a towel to keep the shade clean. He didn't need one. His jaw had that jump in it he gets when he's counting. They worked quickly the way people do when speed stands in for steadiness. Drawer contents found banana boxes. A stack of jeans turned into a shoulder. The blender negotiated the doorway with more dignity than any of us expected. The house took the traffic without comment. It had done heavier things. I swept the front entry between trips, a habit more than a service. At the base of the stair, a new scuff appeared where a box had hesitated and then lost its nerve. The mark had the shape of a slip. I didn't point it out. I just noted where the wood would want attention later. Neighbors did what neighbors do. A dog walker paused, not quite looking. Gus lifted a hand from his yard and then busied himself with a hose that had decided to kink. Bernice drove by and didn't stop. She dipped her chin once as if to press a stamp on the moment seen. Sloane filled the truck space with angles and instructions. She directed Mason with her wrist, an orchestra of wrists and sighs. "Wrap the mirror," she said. "No, the other one. The one we actually like." She passed the kitchen, saw the envelope, didn't reach. Her mouth did a dry thing. "We won't need charity," she said to the room, or to me, or to the part of herself that wanted the sentence said. "It isn't charity," I answered and left the rest unbuilt. By mid-morning, the walls upstairs had found their blank. The spare room showed its rectangle of sun on the carpet, as if for the first time. In the hallway, 2 wire hangers made a sound like tired wind chimes. I gathered them and shook them so they'd be less sad. Sloane's perfume had thinned into something that remembered itself and then forgot. At the porch, the shoe box I'd chosen waited under the bench where Harold kept his work boots. It was the kind of box that once held something white and fancied for winter. I had lined it with newspaper from the year the high school won state. I used the page with the team photo because Mason had stood in the 3rd row, 2 faces from the coach, one tall kid behind his left shoulder. Inside was the worn leather baseball glove he'd begged for and then left in the garage until the leather remembered his hand anyway, and a small stack of Polaroids of him at 8 with a summer haircut he hated. On top, I set the card from the set he'd collected when the shortstop with the bad elbow was everybody's favorite. Under the lid on an index card, I wrote, "Hold on to these." I didn't put my name. Mason shouldered the last box from the hallway books, probably stooped a little to clear the trim, and set it in the mouth of the truck. He came back down the walk and saw the shoebox because looking forward forces you to notice what's in your way. He lifted the lid and looked only long enough to find the shape of the glove. The angle of his head changed. Then he put the lid back, not careful, not careless, and held the box against his ribs with the kind of grip you use when you want something to know it hasn't been dropped. In the kitchen, he stood over the maple eyes on the envelope. He didn't touch it. He took a paper cup and drank water in 2 swallows that sounded louder than they had a right to. "We'll get the rest," he said. "I know," I said. His hand hovered over the envelope, then withdrew like a person learning where a fence is. He slid it into his jacket, a single motion with no show in it. He didn't say thank you. The absence wasn't an insult. It was a temperature reading. The last thing out was the coat tree they never used. It went awkward down the steps, all limbs and apologies. The truck door slammed and the truck barked a diesel cough, and the street took on a different angle with that much bulk gone from its curb. Sloane adjusted her sunglasses and looked at the porch, as if it were a stage she had read on the flyer but not chosen. She didn't look at me. She took the passenger seat and checked the mirror in quick pulses until she liked what it showed. Mason stood by the driver's door with one hand on the roof. He didn't produce a speech. He gave me the smallest nod that still counts. Then he looked away and climbed in. When they turned the corner, the house did a small, perceptible thing. The air near the baseboards changed. The walls set down what they were holding. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the paint, where hands over the years have found the same quiet. The clock in the kitchen kept its pace. The dog in the alley rearranged himself without audience. I started with the scuff at the stair. Fine sandpaper, a steady wrist, a cloth with a whisper of stain, just enough to make the mistake part of the board. The banister under my palm felt honest. Upstairs I lifted the 2 windows that had been shut too often and let the room take a lungful. The curtains learned the breeze again. In the bathroom I tightened a loose hinge with the good screwdriver Harold had labeled house in a steadier hand than mine. The towel bar stopped announcing itself with every swallow of air. Back downstairs the wobbly chair offered itself, and I accepted. A folded matchbook under the short leg would have done, but I turned it over instead and noticed a screw with no patience. A quarter from the change jar fit its slot fine. The wobble became a memory you could still call up if you tried. I collected abandoned things from corners. A novelty mug shaped like a camera lens, a phone charger with its wire bit through a beanie with a logo I couldn't read. I put them in a paper sack and set it by the door with a note that said left behind. The ink bled at a curve and I didn't start over. The porch light switch plate, a cheap plastic that had been meant to be temporary, caught my eye. In the cedar chest at the foot of my bed sat a small brass plate Harold had bought at some hardware store closing sale because it was heavy for its size and you never know. I found it where he'd left it wrapped in a sock that had lost its pair. 4 screws and a shallow breath later, the brass sat where the plastic had been warm in the palm when the sun carried to it. The toggle clicked with a grown-up sound. I cut the hydrangeas back to sensible and set a few of the best blooms in a plain glass jar on the maple. The water magnified the stems as if the plant had secrets worth enlarging. A ring of sunlight slid across the table, found the salt and pepper, found my hand. When the light turned the corner of the day, I took my phone and typed 1 line with both thumbs so the letters would be steady. When you're ready to speak with respect, the porch light will be on. I put the phone down face up and didn't wait near it. The sentence sat there and didn't ask for company. I locked the back door. The new brass plate took the pad of my thumb like it had been waiting for that thumb to get around to it. Outside the bulb came on because that is what happens when a circuit is completed. From the alley the dog looked toward the glow and then curled back into his pallet. The house breathed and the breath had a shape I recognized. The maple held the jar and the room held the maple. And I sat for a while not guarding anything, not rehearsing anything, listening to the second hand find its way around. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.